From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Coal on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Coal on Congress. Today we're joined by Denise Bode. Denise is a nationally recognized energy policy expert and Chief Executive Officer of the American Wind Energy Association. Denise has a long background in public service in Oklahoma, serving as legal counsel and on the staff of then U.S. Senator David Boren, to 9 years of service, of course, on the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. Denise, I can't tell you how wonderful it is to have you there, because we have a lot of history together. And I was actually, before we get into the substance of the program, I was telling my staff on the way down that there was two things I need to know. One, I was regaling them with the story when Governor Keating dispatched me to here, and you were head of the American Oil and Gas Association, to try and persuade you to take an enormous cut in salary, separate yourself from your husband by 1,300 miles, and try to do a commuting marriage and come back and serve your state and be our corporation commissioner. Of course, you went on and won two elections there. It wasn't just an appointed process. So all that, and gosh, you did a magnificent job for the state of Oklahoma.
Oh, and I learned a lot. I appreciated the opportunity so much. You know, it was a wonderful opportunity to give back to the state that had, so blessed me and my family.
Well, I know you came back to turn around the country, but I also have to say this and just remind people that you ran a really strong campaign for Congress yourself, and I thought, gosh, I wish you were still in Oklahoma. This is the best congressperson we never had, and I'm absolutely convinced this time in an open seat situation that you would have been, of course, a sitting corporation commissioner. You probably won. And but I know you're up here doing important and great work for the country, and frankly, we benefit from it enormously in Oklahoma. So you're just like the most valuable player wherever you're at. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I hope to share a little bit about the good news in the wind industry and the opportunities for Oklahoma,
well, let's start with that because you do obviously head up the most important national organization in terms of developing policy and advocating for the use of wind power. We're a big beneficiary. So tell us how things are looking right now.
Well, it's really exciting. This last year we hit a historic high of adding 10,000 megawatts of new capacity, which makes us #1 in the world, the U.S., and also makes us another historic high in terms of adding new electric generation, clean electric generation that benefits the whole country. But that puts us up to 35,000 megawatts added. And when you talk about policy that really cleans up the air and avoids carbon and all the things that everybody talks about here in Washington, by adding this source of generation, which adds jobs and all sorts of good things, it does all that. So we're really excited. And Oklahoma,
I thought you'd get around to us.
I'm really excited about Oklahoma because we end up at 1,000 megawatts for the first time in our history. So we've reached a historic high as a state. And that's really good because I believe in having a diversified energy portfolio. I mean, we've had the historic industries of the oil and gas industry and even a little coal in Oklahoma that have really, really contributed to our state, and some of the greatest entrepreneurs are still there, building those industries. And we're adding another tool in our arsenal, and that's wind power, and it's a mighty manufacturing, a mighty job adder, because you have to really build all those manufacturing facilities for the 8,000 component parts close to where you build the wind farms. So it's a great opportunity for Oklahoma to go after a whole new manufacturing sector that'll be there forever, because the source of wind is infinite, source of energy is infinite. So we're real excited about attracting some new manufacturing facilities. I've been talking to at least 2 or 3 different companies that are looking at Oklahoma, one of which is pretty much already decided to come there. So I'm trying to be a one-man economic band in the wind industry to try to pull people down to Oklahoma to add value. So
Well, if you're looking forward first from a national policy perspective, What do you see as the big challenges that the industry faces that we need to be focused on here in Washington so that we can foster the continued growth of, actually it's one of the few energy sources that brings conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats together. They all want to do the things that might be helpful.
Yeah, it's actually a bipartisan support for an energy bill on the Senate side that put together a renewable electric standard, which is, a lot of folks misunderstand what that means, and they say, oh, well, it's a mandate. Well, what a renewable electric standard is basically setting a hard target for your utilities to have a portion of their electric generation be diversified into renewable electricity. And that's what they've done in 39 countries. All of European Union has hard targets for each country, and 29 states. In fact, every state surrounding Oklahoma has one, and it's really a major factor in where you site manufacturing facilities. Most of the states can meet that standard, but it's more a checkoff thing, like right to work was for Oklahoma, to attract manufacturing. And so that's a big policy. It sends, and that's something here in Washington that's going to be a critical part, I think, of sending that signal to the manufacturers that we're serious about really adding this whole new manufacturing sector to the U.S. So that's one of the big deals. And I want to explain the mandate, if I might, just
go
briefly.
Right ahead.
One of the things that we did as corporation commissioners is determine what the kind of generation we were going to have. The utility would come to us, and of course utilities get guaranteed rate of return, and they also get guaranteed service territories. And in exchange for that franchise from the government to have a special business opportunity, the government determines, and it was the Regulatory Commission and its states, and sometimes it's national governments, in the case of other countries, they determine what's in the public interest. And so exchange for a guaranteed rate of return, we get to decide at the Corporation Commission, for example, we got to decide what kind of electric generation was in the public interest. And so sometimes it was a gas plant, or sometimes it was decided we want nuclear, we don't. And in the case of renewable electricity, there's been a huge interest in expanding renewables. And so a renewable electricity standard says nationally it's in the national interest to have renewable electricity as part of our portfolio as a nation. And so that's why I wanted to explain. It's like 100 years of utility policy is what we're really talking about. It's not like the renewable fuel standard that was initially passed. It really was a mandate on the private sector to do something that they had never done before. So I kind of wanted to explain that because I think there's a real difference there, and it really is something that's been embraced by the majority of the states and the majority of basically the developed world, including China.
Well, I think one of the challenges, just from a legislative and a political standpoint, is so often in Congress when we see what I think is a good idea, it's usually coupled with a lot of bad things from like a fossil fuel, particularly an oil and gas standpoint. So it sort of puts Oklahoma members on both sides of the aisle, and we obviously have a great future, as you know. I'm going to talk to you about it a little bit later. In the oil and gas, particularly natural gas, and there's a very close relationship, obviously, between wind and natural gas. So we sort of get caught. I actually had a bill which I'd introduced several years, and it was we have Berge Wind Power in Norman, Oklahoma, which is not into the big public utility stuff, but provides wind turbines for individual houses and ranches and things like that, and exports all over the world. It's really a great company and growing company. And we were making progress getting it. At the end of the day, I couldn't get it into a bill that I could vote for. My good friend Earl Blumenauer from Oregon, he's very liberal, and we hardly agree on anything, except we like one another. And Earl came by and said, that's really a great bill. If I stole that, would you be my Republican co-author, and maybe we could actually get it into a bill that I could vote for, even if you could? And that's what happened. We eventually got it done. But there's a lot of those little things that are tricky. But again, it is an area that is so easy for Republicans and Democrats when they don't clutter it up with other things.
Oh, and I understand that.
To work together on.
I know, and I think we may get an opportunity to talk more about that this year. I'm really hoping that the focus goes back to that, because with the kind of activity and opportunities we have, we really could have one of the bright spots of the economy be creating a whole new manufacturing sector in the U.S.
Yeah, well,
of course,
stuff. As I'm sure you know, President Obama, when he was in Ohio, that's where he was at a facility that was building wind turbines, and trying to point the way toward at least here's an area in the future that America can really be dominant in.
Yep, added almost $20 billion to the economy this last year in 2009, more so than any other energy sector. In the power sector, that is, in the power sector.
Pretty amazing. Well, tell me about the relationship, because a lot of our viewers will know it, but a lot won't. The synergy, if you will, between one of Oklahoma's great historic natural resources, and that's natural gas, and wind energy. How do they work together?
Oh, we're natural partners. You know, it's interesting because the natural gas industry really began to be the way in which you balance the grid almost upon first use for electric generation, because if a big coal plant would go out or a big even a combined cycle gas plant that takes a long time to cycle up and down goes out, you've got to have these peaking plants, these gas peaking plants around that can come on to stabilize the electric grid. And so when wind started becoming a real player both in Europe, where it really grew to 15 to 20% of their electric right now, and in the U.S. as it's becoming, natural gas, those peaking plants really provide the kind of when you're talking about coal and nuclear and other things, you get you have maybe 300 or 400 megawatts goes off like that, and so you've got to have the gas come up quickly for lots. For wind, it's variable. So the way you use the peaking plants for natural gas is a little different. So you have to learn how to, the variability is very predictable. The weather, the forecasting on wind going up and down is very predictable, but it's a different way to use gas peaking. And so you have a real natural partnership to fill in the ebbs and flows there with natural gas. And so it's really a wonderful partnership. And what's really exciting this year, it's really natural gas in the lead, wind right second, and we're the two new leading sources of electric generation in the country, and that's been the case the last 2 years. Gas is led and wind's been right underneath it, and together we supply over 80% of the new electric generating capacity in the country. And so we're together going in to fill the gaps as less coal-fired power plants are being built, and you're having to fill that gap. It's really natural gas and wind as partners that are getting it done.
I hadn't even thought about the forecasting into this, but of course, at the University of Oklahoma, thanks to our very good friend, mutual friend, President Boren, we've got really the premier, weather complex, if you will, emerging, public and private, both with NOAA, both with what's done by the state in terms of meteorology, and in private companies that really do global forecasting for all sorts of purposes for commercial business. So that would have, I assume, a niche here too.
Huge impact, a huge opportunity for another business, side business for the University of Oklahoma. One of the interesting things is the way we were able to get wind up so quickly when I was on the commission was because we had 10 years of meteorological data, because we had wind towers in every single county. They were put on for watching for tornadoes and measuring weather, but they were able to use that information for an economic purpose to prove to people financing wind projects that it was a sweet spot for wind. So really there's all sorts of public-private partnerships that are available as wind really comes on in Oklahoma and around the Southwest, for Oklahoma in particular and for the University of Oklahoma.
Well, you've talked a little bit about, obviously, the mandating process in terms of essentially guaranteeing a market that wind grows into. What, in terms, you're also one of the great premier experts on tax policy, period, across the board, and certainly from an Oklahoma standpoint, from your tenure with Senator Boren. So what tax policies would be most favorable in terms of advancing this industry?
Well, it's interesting, in the oil and gas industry, I've worked on probably every one of the tax provision ever done, intangible drilling costs, percentage depletion, all the things that really allow you to recover your costs that are sort of unique in the oil and gas industry. And they've been around since the 1920s, and that has been extraordinarily beneficial, having that stability of tax policy to make sure that we have an American industry and that these independent producers that help find the natural gas in the U.S. are really supported. And so what's happening happened as they really started up the wind industry in the U.S. about a little under 10 years ago, they started putting in place, they began with an investment tax credit, and then they switched it to a production tax credit. But part of the problem of these policies is they would let it expire. So you just get the industry going, and it'd be going for 2 years, and then it would expire. And so the industry would fall off 80%. And then they'd get it back on in a year, and they'd go up again, and they'd be counting on, and then it'd expire. And so that's what's happened in the last 10 years, and so you haven't had any stability. And of course, for a developer, you might be able to put a project here and there thinking it's going to be in place, but for a manufacturer, he's not going to come to the U.S. when he sees this boom and bust of tax policies. He's not going to do that. And so that's why we keep focusing on the renewable electric standard, because that's a long-term commitment. The tax policy has never been consistent or long-term for the wind industry like other industries, and so having a policy in place that actually encourages the development of wind, and now we've got 2 years, the one that was passed as part of the recovery package, the investment tax credit that can be convertible, which really kicked off this development boom towards the end of the year, when thought we were going to lose half the industry at the beginning of the year because we lost all our financing. Really has helped, but it expires the end of 2010 again. and there's another option that was part of that, which is the production tax credit. It gave you the option that expires the end of next year. So you again got this sort of like rush to kind of get things done, and the manufacturers are standing over here. Well, why should I spend $1 billion on a plant in the U.S. if this is the only commitment? Because traditionally, as we built new generation sources, we've given long-term commitments to industries. The nuclear industry, which we very much support, and we consider as a partner too in providing, no emissions electricity. Right. It has had the Price-Anderson Act, which basically has the federal government insuring it, for almost 50 years. And that really allows that industry to go to the marketplace and actually get financing. And so those kinds of things are really necessary if you really want to have an American energy industry. There has to be a national policy that we want nuclear, which was passed, that we want natural gas generation, which was there, that we want renewable electricity. And so each of those are critically important, and having a long-term tax policy that's more than 3 years is really great. But having a long-term renewable target for utilities so the manufacturers know it's going to be there is really the thing that we think, even more so than tax policy, will drive the industry to grow and will attract manufacturers. Because the way the wind industry works, it's not like other electric industries where the utilities build the generation. Almost 90% of the electric generation in the wind side is privately financed. It's not financed through a utility. So
I did not know that as a stunning statistic.
Yeah, and so you've got private companies going to the marketplace, and that's why the tax credits are so important, because it's all private sector financed. And so you go to the markets, they help monetize, the credits help you monetize to add to your own financing and debt you may incur, and then you build the facility, and you basically negotiate with the utility, and you give them, and wind was one of the real benefits of wind, is you get a long-term contract. So you have a 20 or 30-year contract. The utility knows exactly what it's going to be paying, because there's no fuel costs, because wind costs nothing. Right. And so they know what the price of electricity will be. And that's a great benefit to having wind on your portfolio if you're a utility or utility commissioner looking at it, because you know what that cost is going to be. It can be built in. And so it really helps provide, it gets rid of the volatility that you have in other fuel costs where it goes up and down. Even when their prices are low, it may be up again. So it's hard to always predict, and it's one of the few sources of electric generation that you get a long-term contract with, because most other people won't contract, over a couple of years, because they're kind of thinking, well, the price will go up, so I'm not, I don't want to lock in too far, So anyway, it's really interesting, this industry, and it's very entrepreneurial. It's what I like about it. It reminds me so much of working for the independent producers, because these guys are very entrepreneurial.
Well, let me ask you about a part of this whole puzzle that I know you know a lot about from your background as a utility commissioner, and that is the distribution of wind, just like the distribution of oil and gas and coal, is not equal every place in America. So we're going to have areas like Oklahoma that have the ability to produce, frankly, beyond what they need in the short term, given its energy mix. So what's the state of the power grid, and what's our ability in places like Oklahoma and particularly through the Plains states to actually export electricity into populous markets along the coast?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. You know, part of what is in the Senate pass bill that we've really been working on as a team with all other sectors of the industry and the utilities, particularly American Electric Power, AEP, has been really part of they're on our board and they're part of our team talking about transmission because we have a transmission grid that's 50+ years old. So if you can imagine that old a highway, and yet everybody and their brother is plugging everything into every wall, and so we need electricity, and we needed more of it, and we know we'll need more of it, particularly as the economy. So we have to build out a better electron highway around the country, an interstate highway. And now that we've got these vast resources being developed in the whole middle part of the country, we've got to build the transmission that allows every part of the country to benefit from that cheap electricity. And so that's part of the Senate passed bill. We'll have that was passed out of the Senate Energy Committee on a bipartisan basis, was to have national planning.
Something happened that was bipartisan in Washington, D.C.?
Well, the whole energy bill on the Senate side was, you know, and in fact we had cost, the ability. It basically mirrors the Natural Gas Pipeline Act, so that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission would be able to oversee and provide input into cost allocation for building the interstate highway, because it is interstate commerce, and the planning process, so that you'd be able to pull together regions to kind of determine how you put it all together, and then also siting, so we make sure that the highway gets sited correctly. So that's critically important because we have over 300,000 megawatts of wind projects sitting in line at these regional transmission organizations waiting to get a place on the transmission lines. So we're ready. We could meet 20% right now of the projects that are sitting there that are that have been planned, that if we can build the transmission, which if we build the transmission we're talking about less than a can of Coke a month for the average consumer is how much the cost would be. And it would be paid back in 3 or 4 years, because the ability to get cheaper electricity and more abundant electricity and diverse supplies of it really, really benefits. So it's really exciting.
What sort of resistance are you getting, and how do you accommodate? Obviously, state regulators usually and local regulators want to be able to keep control of siting. You've got to think, though, in terms of the cross-jurisdictional boundaries, and somebody has to, in the end, make the call, so to speak. Right. Where does that rest in the Senate bill? How should that work going forward?
It's interesting because, you know, I had the great honor of being part of the Southwest Power Pools commissioners that helped put together the first regional tariff. So we created a tariff that went to FERC and was approved by FERC that allowed the sharing of costs across 8 states. And that was the first time that had ever been done. And my colleague Jeff Cloud is now on SPP, basically managing some of the new exciting things that are going on, which allow even more opportunities for that transmission to be built out and others to be able to use Oklahoma wind and Oklahoma natural gas and whatever electricity we can supply. So that's really a great opportunity. That would be part of what they do at the national level. The real opposition has been, part of the reason it wasn't in the House bill on the energy side was because there's a lot of Northeastern members that want to build offshore wind and offshore projects, and so they say, well, we don't need the wind from the Midwest. So we don't want transmission lines built, and we don't want to pay for them because we want to build offshore wind. Well, we need it all. And so you don't want to slow down it being built in other parts of the country because you have a goal of building in yours. And so part of what we have to do is be more thoughtful about how we share that information and ensure them that we're supportive of their projects while encouraging them not to slow down development of transmission in the whole country, because we're all going to need it in a very short order when the economy comes back.
Well, I'm like you. I'm a kind of all the above energy guy. I do have some skepticism about the Northeastern states actually letting you develop offshore wind. You know, it'd be great if it was going to happen, but we never seem to be able to get much in that regard. And I'm surprised, as dependent, frankly, as they are on natural gas and other things coming out of the middle of the country, why this would be anything different or a problem for them. But
well, that's been one of the real holdups because, of course, Mr. Markey's chairman of the subcommittee, and so they put a place saver in, but on the House side, but it really wasn't as big a part of the bill as the Senate bill, where there's broad-based support for doing it from Republican and Democratic side.
Well, I've got a whole nother, normally if I got somebody like you here, you in particular, I'd say, now help me bash, cap, and trade. but we're not done, but we're getting down.
Okay.
But I am very interested. I mean, you're focused obviously now very much on a particular part of our energy mix that's growing and that we all think holds enormous promise for our future. But as somebody who really is expert in the range of issues across the board that relate to energy, where do you see the country going, not just in wind power, but overall in terms of energy policy? What are the things, if you had to tick them off, the president said, come in here, Denise, with all your vast experience, tell me the 4 or 5 things that we need to do to make the country energy independent. What are the things we ought to be doing?
Well, I think in terms of, obviously the renewable electricity standard to really help get renewables as part of the portfolio and to track manufacturing. The transmission policy, which benefits all electric generation. I mean, natural gas needs it as well. Part of what we were doing at SPP before we even really started developing wind was to try to build out our transmission grid because Oklahoma had more natural gas generation than it was using. And so it was an opportunity for us to export that electricity from natural gas as well. And so wind is sort of a latecomer to that whole need for transmission. So that's really important. I think the Nat Gas Act, one of the things that I've been very supportive of, and when I came on board the American Wind Energy Association, I asked my board to be able to partner with the folks from the Pickens Plan to have wind and natural gas be partners. And so we actually put money into the joint campaign to focus on natural gas for transportation as well as wind. And so I think the Nat Gas Act is a really important part of building out an alternative, particularly on the big heavy fleets that are going across the highways.
Again, that's an area I really do believe there could be real bipartisan compromise on natural gas as well, and that sort of thing. It just because it generates so many jobs. And frankly, now that, as you know better than I, we've got natural gas drilling in so many areas that we haven't seen it in a long time, and our abundance is up. It's pretty amazing. We now have price stability, national independence, and we'll just develop the resource. It's just wonderful. So.
And I think one of the things that I would suggest, and again, I'm not speaking for my organization in answering your question, really. I think one of the things we need to do is we need to have incentives for people to switch to cleaner energy. And I think part of what we do is we try to punish people for doing it, and I think what we want to do is incentivize it. And so programs that would allow utilities in particular to move off building new coal-fired plants, which by the way are more expensive now anyway, to building cleaner energy generation would be a really, and I don't have a specific policy to suggest, but I think incentives to do that allow people to make the change without feeling like they're sort of being pushed into it. So I think you incentivize people, and you try to offer a carrot before you try to use a stick, and I think that's really the best approach.
That's the old politician in you speaking. You understand how Americans think. Don't punish me, reward me for good behavior. But, well, I could talk to you forever. I think our listeners can tell just the breadth of knowledge, your sheer enthusiasm for the topic, and your frankly, a deep commitment to public service. So we're about out of time, but I just wanted to thank you. I hope those of you who've had the chance to listen and review this program, I know you're as impressed with Denise Bode as I always am. This is Congressman Tom Cole from our nation's capital. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, it's been wonderful
How
to have
fun.
you.